During this harvest time, when the wheel of life turns and the veil between this world and the next grows thin, we celebrate the Gaelic Samhain, the Latino El Dia de los Muertos, the Christian All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, and of course, we celebrate Halloween. Each tradition in their own way is a time to confront our own mortality, a time to courageously look at our fears, a time to honor our dead, a time to remember all of those departed souls whom we miss so dearly. All souls, all of the souls, every single one. For in a world of winners and losers, of successes and failures, right and wrong, it's certainly easier to celebrate the saints only, religion's moral medalists and heroes. It's easier to celebrate the saints, those dressed in halos and storied myth. Their humanity often obscured by a very carefully crafted image, documented miracles shining down from pedestals far too high. It's easier to celebrate the saints, and plenty of saints are indeed worth celebrating. Truly exemplars extraordinaire. But today, this day, we celebrate all souls, all of the souls, every single one. The sweet and the grating, the loved and the hated, the cherished and the neglected, the valued and the exploited, the exalted and the lowly. All souls, whether they are saints or not. All souls, because all life is one. Today is set aside for us to remember not only our ancestors, not only our saints, not only our families, not only our friends and acquaintances and neighbors. Today we give thanks for this one day a year that bids us remember the entirety of humanity, the whole history of conscious life that lived and died and brought us here today to this moment. All of the souls, all sacred, all holy, all one. Come, let us worship together. I'd ask Becca Cornett to come forward and share with us the morning's reading.
This morning's reading is called This Sacred Thread by Heather K. Janulis. They once dwelled among us, the people of memory. They who knew us, they who taught us, they who hurt us, they who loved us. They touch our lives time and again through their presence and their absence, through familiar scents and favorite songs, through old stories and renewed sorrow. As the earth turns and leaves fall, we reach back to renew the bonds between us. With hearts and hands open, we hold on to love, ever stronger than death. We reach back in gratitude and understanding without our time together. Without our time together, the pain and the joy, we would never be who we are today. We would have little to pass on ourselves. Without fear, with thanksgiving, and with hope for all that awaits, we remember those who have gone before. We honor the circle of life and death and our place within the sacred thread.
Thank you, Becca. Well, this morning I'd like to share with you a story. In Richard A. Kalish's book, Death, Grief, and Caring Relationships, he tells this story called The Horse on the Dining Room Table. Right on cue. This story, it's a story of a young man who climbed to the top of Mount Evmandu to meet the famous guru of Nepsim. He was exhausted by the time he got there, so he sat with the guru for a few minutes until he was rested and recovered. Finally, he said, "Please, I need to understand something about what it means to die. I want to know what dying people feel when no one will speak with them, nor be open enough to permit them to speak about their dying." Well, the guru went silent for several minutes, and finally he responded, "It is the horse on the dining room table." And he said no more. Well, the young man went back down the mountain feeling calm, knowing the guru's answer had made him feel good, but couldn't quite tell why. Well, years later, he was invited to the home of a casual friend for dinner. He didn't know the other guests very well, but after the hors d'oeuvres and a couple of drinks, they all had gotten much better acquainted with one another and were enjoying each other's company. And then the host invited them into the dining room for dinner. Well, this man was the first to enter the dining room, and he was astonished to see a brown horse was sitting quietly on the dining room table. It was a small horse, to be fair, but it did still fill much of the dining room table. The man caught his breath but didn't say anything, and then he turned to watch the other guests as they came in. Of course, they reacted the same way that he did when they saw a horse. They gasped and stared, but they all said nothing. When the host came in, he looked rapidly from the horse to each of the guests. He was looking at them with his wild stare, like, what is happening? He tried to say something, but all he could choke out was an invitation to please be seated. The guests who were cramped at that small table, they tried to avoid getting too close to that horse while pretending that there wasn't actually a horse there at all. Well, all of them were ill at ease, including the host, who was very ill at ease. The conversation lagged. Every once in a while, someone would try to revive the animated conversation they'd been having earlier, but they couldn't think of anything but the horse. You ever been at a party like that? Well, several times the man thought about saying, "Hey, there's a horse on the dining room table," as you might assume someone would say, but he didn't want to embarrass the host. So he didn't mention anything, and obviously that was a little uncomfortable for everyone, but after all, it was the host's home, and what do you say to a man with a horse in the middle of the dining room table? Well, he could have said that he didn't mind, but that wasn't true. Its presence upset him so much that he couldn't enjoy the dinner or any of the company. He could have said how difficult it was to have a horse on one's dining room table. That wasn't true either. He had no idea what to say. He could have said something like, "How do you feel about having a horse on your dining room table?" But he didn't want to sound like a psychologist. Perhaps he thought, if I ignore it, it might just gallop and go away. Of course, he knew that it wouldn't do that, and of course, it didn't. Well, the man later learned that the hosts were hoping that the dinner guests would be a success, that the party would be a success in spite of the horse. They felt that to mention it would make their guests so uncomfortable that they wouldn't enjoy the visits, but of course, they didn't enjoy it anyways. The hosts were fearful that their guests would offer sympathy, which they didn't want, or understanding, which they needed but couldn't accept. They'd wanted the party to be a success, so they decided to try to make the evening as enjoyable as possible. But it was apparent that they, just like their guests, could think of little else from the horse. Years later, that man, he visited Nepsim again, and he decided to make the journey to see the guru once more. The guru was somehow still alive, although he was quite frail by then. The man said, "My questions are the same. I want to know what dying people feel when no one will speak with them, nor be open enough to permit them to speak about their dying." After several moments, the old man said, "My son, it's the horse on the dining room table. It's a horse that visits every house and sits on the tables of the rich and the poor, of the simple and the wise. The horse just sits there, but its presence makes you wish to leave without speaking of it. If you leave, you will always fear the presence of the horse. When it sits on your table, you will wish to speak of it, but you may not be able to. However, if you speak about the horse, then you will find others can also speak about the horse. At least if you're gentle and you're kind as you speak. The horse will stay there on the dining room table, but you might not be so distraught. You will enjoy your meal, and you will enjoy the company of the host. Or, if it's your table, you'll enjoy the presence of your guests. You can't use magic to make that horse disappear, but you can speak to the horse, and thereby render it less powerful." Well, the guru rose then, and motioning for the man to follow, he walked slowly to his hut. "Now we'll eat," he said. As the man entered the hut with the guru, he had difficulty adjusting to the darkness. The guru walked to a cupboard in the corner and took out bread and cheese and placed them on a mat. He motioned to the man to sit and share his food. The man saw a small horse sitting quietly in the center of the mat. The guru noticed and said, "That horse need not disturb us." The man quietly enjoyed the meal, and he and the guru talked late into the night, while the horse sat quietly there on the mat. I remember when I was a small boy, maybe 5, 6 years old, for some reason my parents took me to a funeral, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a dead body. I don't know who this person was. It wasn't a family member, but I remember it really leaving an impact on me. It was scary. It was something I'd never experienced. And I think as a small child, it was a very concrete way of understanding something that I hadn't thought much of before. That death is part of life. And our children somehow know this too. I know we wish to keep this from them, but it is something that affects all of us. It's that horse on the center of the dining room table. Maybe a child of yours might have lost a pet, seen a dead turkey on the side of the road, been to a funeral, lost a family member, a loved one. And it's sad. And it's hard. But as we all know, it's real. And it's part of our life. So, as we prepare to leave this place, I would ask us to try to remember those feelings that we had when we were small and we first encountered these experiences. And as we trick or treat and share in different family traditions, this time of year is a time that we can see the seasons changing. We can see the trees losing their leaves. We can anticipate the coming winter and the colds, but knowing that nothing can hold back spring. Spring will come. The leaves will return again and again and again. So may it be. Our closing hymn this morning is Winds Be Still, which is number 83 in your gray hymnal.